we are going to go back to a paragraph. We were talking about things. So in accordance with the principles of the materialist, material determines consciousness, and consciousness can impact back on the material through conscious activity. It follows that all of the various forms of oppression, which are rooted in ideology and stem from false consciousness, are able to impact back on the mode of production. That's why racism is intertwined with classism in the United States. Yeah, in above example of English, Irish, this is, okay, when they mean English-Irish racial antagonism, this is when Irish people were not considered white. But I am going to say it's ethnic. So yeah. No worries, I understand. So when they say racial antagonism, this is when Irish people are still considered non-white. In the above example, English and Irish racial antagonisms, Marx makes a clear that the ruling class benefits as such out that eroding such racial antagonisms and ending the English colonization of Ireland would weaken the position of the ruling class and strengthen the proletariat, which would bring about the end of capitalism all the sooner. We can determine that capitalist societies is a higher stage of development than feudal societies by examining the mode of production of each form of society. In historical materialism, a stage of development is considered to be at a higher or lower level based primarily on the development of productive forces. Under feudalism, the productive forces were at a much lower level of agrarian production. The essential means of production was the land, which was used in the production of food. Tools and technology were relatively underdeveloped. Compare this with the much higher level of development of the productive forces under capitalism, which utilizes mechanization and other technology for industrialized material production. Capitalist societies' mode of production utilizes industries with an increasingly complex market economy. Feudal society's mode of production was only able to use manual labor techniques and was limited to small, self-sufficient, self-contained economic organizations. Therefore, capitalist society's mode of production can generate much higher labor productivity than the production mode of feudal societies. Labor productivity simply refers to how much a single human being can produce in the workplace. A worker under capitalism is generally able to produce far more than a worker under feudalism because of the higher level of technology, industrialization, etc., which are employed within the capitalist mode of production. Marx and Engels determined that economic eras do not differ from one from another based on what is produced, but rather based on how production is carried out and which tools are used in production. In other words, economic eras differ from one another based on the mode of production. This discovery that the mode of production plays a decisive role in the development of production processes in society, and with the development of societies in general, is the basis of historical materialism. Understanding human history through the analysis of the history of development and replacement of the mode of production using Marxist-Leninist methodologies of dialectical materialism and materialist dialectics. The dialectical materialism, the words development and replacement have significant specific meanings. Development refers to changes over time, which play through dialectical relationships between all things, phenomena, and ideas. Development occurs through processes of contradictions. Whenever one subject interacts with another subject, they are said to contradict, and both subjects are developed through this contradiction. Replacement refers to the specific form of negation. As two subjects contradict with one another, one subject will eventually negate, and the other subject completely overcoming it. Replacing negation is a specific form of negation, which occurs when one special subject takes the place of another. Replacement is a dialectical process which always takes place gradually, since nothing can pop in and out of existence instantaneously. Therefore, it is important to understand that the replacement of one mode of production by another is a gradual and dialectical process. Capitalism did not immediately and instantaneously replace the feudal mode of production. Instead, capitalism negated feudalism over many generations, as the bourgeois class slowly but surely superseded the previous feudal ruling class through dialectical development processes. Marx and Engels describes this gradual development process in the Manifesto of the Communist Party. Each step in the development of the bourgeoisie was accompanied by a corresponding political advance of that class. An oppressed class under the sway of feudal nobility, an armed and self-governed association in the medieval communes were independent urban republics, as in Italy and Germany. Their taxable, quote, third state of the monarchy, as in France, afterwards, in a period of manufacturing proper, serving either the semi-feudal or the absolute monarch as a counterpose against the nobility, and in fact, cornerstone of the great monarchies in general. The bourgeoisie has at last, since the establishment of modern industry and of the world market, conquered for itself in the modern representative state-exclusive political sway. The executives of the modern state is but a committee of managing the common affairs of the whole bourgeoisie. Similarly, communism will not instantaneously replace capitalism, but will negate capitalism gradually through the revolutionary advance of the working class. The development and replacement of modes of production reflects the inevitable and objective trend of the development of human society, from lower levels to increasingly higher levels, from the ancient production mode to the feudal production mode to the modern capitalist mode of production, etc. Development of human societies is both inevitable and objective. The principles of development of dialectical materialism states that development is the process that comes from within the thing within the thing in itself, the process of solving the contradictions within things and phenomena. Therefore, development is inevitable, objective, and occurs without dependence on human will. In accordance with this principle, it should be understood that all things, phenomena, and ideas are constantly inevitable, changing, and human society is no exception to these universal laws. Development of human society is considered objective because it cannot be subjectively controlled or directed by humans' will and consciousness. Rather, as is explained throughout the rest of this section, it is the material base of society which determines the development of human conscious activity. Productive forces determine the material economic base of human society, and this material base determines the superstructure, which includes philosophy, political government, religion, art, and all other aspects of human society. So, the economic base creates those things. The inevitable of the objective development of human society reflects and forward tendency of development, which is a characteristic of all development processes. This towards tendencies is described in, let's say, part 1, which is last. Note that this is a tendency, that there are exceptions. Occasionally, certain elements, regions, or aspects of human society do tend to fall backward or degrade in some way or another. For example, industry may be degraded through the destruction of war and through economic difficulties. Also note that the term higher level and lower level are value neutral. To say that the society has a higher level of development does not imply that the society is superior to or better than a society with a lower level of development. In historical materialism, to say that a society has moved to a higher level of development simply means that the mode of production has developed to a more complex form with a higher level of labor productivity and productive forces. The consequential. Let me make sure this is consequential. Let me look up this word, everybody. I'll be right back. Wrong word. Right back. I keep highlighting the wrong word. I'll be right back. Its sequential nature of the process of replacing and developing modes of production is also a general rule which governs the development process of human history. Sequential here means that development occurs in a specific sequence from lower stages of development to higher stages of development. It is rare for such a sequential development process to reverse directions or to bypass a stage of development. This sequential nature of the process of human development is strongly related to the development of scientific knowledge and productive forces. As humans learn more about science, nature, and technology, there is a tendency for productive forces to develop in terms of efficiency and output. A simple example of this is the development of transportation methods by human beings. As humans progress from transportation by foot to transportation via beast of burden to transportation by steam engines to modern systems of transportation which utilizes efficient and powerful engines and high quality roads, rail systems, and airplanes, and productive forces also increase at every stage of development. Under normal circumstances, such scientific knowledge develops sequentially over time, but there are exceptions to this general tendency. For example, in some places and times, technological stages, the stages of development of production, may be bypassed through the introduction of high technology from abroad. As an example, Vietnamese industry and agriculture received many high technology production techniques and technologies from the Soviet Union during the revolutionary period of 1945 through 1975, which allowed the nation to bypass some steps of scientific development which rapidly increased productive forces. For the most part, looking at the big picture of humanity as a whole, it is generally necessary to go through the sequence of human development as new technologies are developed, sequentially through the development of our scientific understanding of the world and of technology. The following excerpt is from the article Karl Marx's view of productive forces and the issue of supplementing developing this view in the current period from Vietnamese Communist Journal, Communist Review. Karl Marx believed that productive forces represent the practical capacity of humans in the process of transforming the natural world. When carrying out material production, humans use labor and tools to impact the natural world so that they can create material wealth, which can serve their essential needs. Also, in that process, humans come to understand the law of nature, transforming the natural world from a wild, simple place into a second world with the participation of human hands and minds. Material production is always changing, so productive forces are dynamic factors and a process that is constantly being innovated and developed. Productive forces create material premises for the existence of development of human society. Productive forces are also a basic criterion to evaluate social progress in each specific historical period. That is why in his work, The German Ideology, Marx affirmed, Quote, history is nothing but the succession of a separate generation, each of which exploits the materials and capital funds, the productive forces handed down to it by all preceding generations, and thus, on the one hand, continues the traditional activities in completely changed circumstances, and, on the other hand, modifies the old circumstances with a completely changed activity. Thus, from Karl Marx's point of view, it can be understood that the concepts of productive forces refers to the combination of workers and the means of production to create a certain material production power. According to Marx, in order to transform the natural world and create material wealth, workers need to have a synergy between physical and intellectual strengths, as these are factors that create human working ability. As Marx wrote in Capital Volume 1, Chapter 7, he opposes himself to nature as one of her own forces, setting in motion arms and legs, head and hands, the natural forces of his body, in order to appropriate nature's production in a form adapted to his own wants. However, if human activities are limited to human labor through the human body alone, then material production process could not be developed to higher levels. Humans have thus developed other means of material production, such as making use of the mechanical, physical, and chemical properties of some substances in order to make other substances subservient to his aims. This objects of material production, which Marx calls organs, give workers the ability to extend their hands and make their process of influencing the natural world more effective. It means if the means of production are a necessary condition for material production process, then the workers are the main subject in that process, playing a decisive role in the development of production. Thus, according to Karl Marx, if there were no humans who knew how to manufacture and use tools of labor to impact the natural world, there would be no process of material production. In addition to discussing the two basic elements constituting the productive forces, Karl Marx also emphasizes the important role of science in material production in general and in the development of productive forces in particular. Marx explained, quote, the development of fixed capital, i.e. machinery of production, indicates to what degree general social knowledge has become a direct force of production, and to what degree, hence, the condition of the process of social life itself have come under the control of a general intellect and been transformed in accordance with it. To what degree the powers of social production have been produced, not only in the form of knowledge, but also in immediate organs of social practice and of real life process. According to the above thesis of Karl Marx, scientific knowledge has caused fixed capital, such as factories and machines, used in production to transform to a certain extent and become a direct productive force. In other words, scientific knowledge is applied in materialized into machines and into production tools and used by workers in the production process. Thus, scientific knowledge becomes a direct productive force. The conditions for scientific knowledge is becoming a direct productive force were affirmed by Karl Marx as follows, quote, the development of machinery along this path occurs only when large industries has already reached a higher stage and all the sciences have been pressed into the service of capital, and when secondly, the available machinery itself already provides great capabilities. Inventions then become a business, and the application of science to direct production itself becomes a prospect which determines the solicits and solicits it. Historical materialism is essential about looking for the root cause of historical change in human society. A material examination of human history shows this root cause to be change in development of the mode of production. The development of the mode of production strongly depends on the level of development, dependent upon the development of scientific knowledge that humans achieve through generations of theory and practice. Therefore, we can conclude that, as a general rule of historical materialism, the historical development of humanity is sequential, even if some societies have specific conditions, may bypass some steps. This is the general rule of sequential development of history. It must be noted that within a society, different communities can exist at different levels of development, depending on the certain subjectivity and certain objective and subjective conditions, where there might be a mix of different production modes within the development period. Likewise, a community within the wider society might abandon or bypass the dominant mode of production or go straight to a higher mode of production. That being said, the development of conscious awareness of the objective laws of historical materialism has enabled some societies to consciously endeavor to bypass the stage of capitalism in attempts to go directly to socialist mode of production. And we have a picture. Not many people, but we have a picture, everybody. Okay, we got workers, strength, intellectual strength, and physical strength. They're in a circle. We have the material production. Workers determine machinery, tools, and those impact the workers. Workers, material production. This is the workers by themselves. All right, so human workers engaged with the natural world to create wealth by applying intellectual and physical strength. This leads to the development of machinery and tools, what Marx calls the organs of production, which enables humans to increase material production capabilities. Interesting. An example of a society bypassing a dominant mode of production and going straight to the higher mode of production is before and during French colonial rule. Vietnam was essentially an agrarian feudal society, despite the existence of some light industry and a nascent capitalist class. The vast majority of Vietnamese workers were peasants, slaves, and farmers. The ruling class of Vietnam before and during the colonial period were not capitalists, but the emperor, feudal lords, and French colonialists, who all constituted a landed class which was essentially feudalist in nature. During and after the revolutionary period of Vietnam, industrialization was rapidly implemented with great assistance from the Soviet Union and other foreign nations under the leadership of the Communist Party of Vietnam. The mechanization of Vietnamese industry and agriculture took place largely during the subsidizing period. Without the capitalist class, Vietnam was therefore able to transform itself into modern industrial nation without having ever fully established a capitalist political economy. Agriculture in Vietnam reflects these efforts to bypass capitalist class society. Before and during the occupation of Vietnam, agriculture was feudalistic in nature. Feudal and colonial landowners employed hundreds of thousands of slaves and peasants who worked essentially within the framework of the traditional feudal mode of production. During the revolutionary period, the Communist Party of Vietnam implemented significant land reforms, which transferred farmland directly to farmers and provided farmers with tools and training, which allowed for mass mechanization. Today, Vietnamese agriculture, which employs approximately 70% of Vietnamese workers, is highly mechanized. The capitalist ownership of the farmland is prohibited. In this way, Vietnamese farmers have managed to bypass a capitalistic agriculture by going straight to the mode of production, which is mechanized, highly productive, and worker-owned. This is just one of the ways in which Vietnam has endeavored to transition to socialism while bypassing the capitalist mode of production. These efforts have resulted in many victories and failures in both theory and practice. The fact that multiple modes of production can exist within a society simultaneously is an expression of the unity of diversity, which leads to the richness of human history. Diversity and unity. So that's very interesting. And that's very interesting. It's depending on the productive forces and the technologies and stuff like that, and your advancements in your development, that indicates what's the next direction. So since Vietnam got help with that help, and got help from the Soviet Union, they were able to they're saying they were able to divert the capitalist mode of production, and they're also saying that you can have multiple mode of production. All right, so here we go. Diversity and unity and diversity is an aspect of the principles of general relationships of the materialist dialectical methodological and philosophical framework. These concepts are explained in detail in part 1. Diversity and unity means that there are an infinite number of diverse relationships between things, phenomenons, and ideas, but that all these relationships share the same foundation in the material world. Unity and diversity means that universal relationships which unite all things, phenomenon, and ideas can manifest in definitely diverse ways. Although human society develops subsequently, it does not develop mechanically or predictably. A given mode of production can manifest in a great diversity of forms in various human societies, and different modes of production can even exist simultaneously within one society. It's just one's got to be put in the primary and then one's got to be, So, for example, even though the United States of America is a highly capitalistic society, there are small numbers of workers, cooperatives, which are not owned by capitalists. There are also still examples of slave labor being employed in the United States of America, sometimes illicitly, such as with human trafficking, and sometimes legally, such as American prisons. As a counterexample, we can look at socialist nations, both historically and in modern contexts, such as the Soviet Union, Vietnam, China, and Cuba, which have allowed capitalist-owned corporations to operate, even though these nations are controlled by the Communist Party. This is discussed in the articles, quote, approaching the socialist-oriented market economy and human issues from goals and driving force of development in the Vietnamese Communist Journal, Communist Review. From the historical perspective, for a long time during the process of socialism building, both theoretically and practically, people have compared socialism and capitalism as an absolute and in an absolute and metaphysical way. They have also thought that what is in capitalism must be rejected by socialism and vice versa, including the market economy as a result of the development of human history. It should be clearly realized that the socialist society, as a social economic form, cannot have everything available in a capitalist society, but it has prerequisites in many important aspects for the birth of a new social economic form. One of these prerequisites is a well-developed market economy, thanks to the extremely highly and strongly developed production forces. Lenin soon realized the mistake of haste in formulating and implementing the wartime communist policy, and he promptly corrected by proposing a new economic policy, NEP, for Russia to develop the production in multi-sector goods and start the market economy. He strongly asserted that, quote, "We cannot conceive of socialism other than socialism based on all the lessons drawn by the great civilization of capitalism. During transition periods between the mode of production and the next, there will be a mixture of modes of production within the developing society. In Europe and North America, during the transition from feudalism to capitalism, there existed simultaneously for a time both capitalism and feudal lords. Even today, around the world, vestige of feudal lords remains, such as entire nations ruled by monarchs. And even within the current capitalist era, in human civilization, there exists a broad range of forms in which the capitalist mode of production manifests. For example, there is an obvious difference between a rich, developed capitalist country, which has an economy dominated by local capitalists, and an impoverished, imperialized country, which is heavily dominated by foreign capitalists. All of this diversity exists within the current era of capitalism, demonstrating the concepts of unity and diversity in capitalist societies, just as unity and diversity was expressed in every preceding era of history. However, no matter how rich and diverse the history of human society might be, and even if a society goes through detours as it advances through the stages of development, in the end, history still follows the general direction of development upward direction from lower levels to higher level mode of production. As previously mentioned in annotation 10, advancing from lower levels of production to higher levels of production merely refers to the general tendency and does not imply a tendency in a better direction. For example, many indigenous societies which were forced to advance into capitalist mode of production suffered tremendously or were even wiped out entirely in the process. It is also important to recognize that many lower-level modes of production in indigenous society were far more suitable in terms of ecology and preferable to the indigenous population in terms of satisfaction of life and well-being for the population at large. Certainly, the development of capitalism in what is today called the United States of America was certainly not seen as a beneficial development by indigenous people, as encapsulated in this quote from the speech of Santa Anna, chief of the Kiowa Nation. It's Sanatina. S-A-T. Oh, I got a warning? What? I got a warning? Why did I get a warning? Anyways. Satanta, chief of the Kiowa Nation. All the land south of the Arkansas River belongs to the Kiowas and Comanches. I don't want to give away any of it. I love the land and the buffalo and will not part with any. I have heard that you intend to settle us on a reservation near the mountains. I don't want to settle there. I love to roam over the wide prairies, and when I do it, I feel free and happy. But when we settle down, we grow pale and die. A long time ago, this land belonged to our fathers, but when I go up to the river, I see camps of soldiers on its banks. These soldiers cut down my timber. They unalive my buffalo. And when I see that, my heart feels like bursting with sorrow. Similarly, French colonialism developed certain aspects of Vietnam by introducing railways, steam engines, and other such technologies to the nation. But this was at a great cost. A cause untold suffering of Vietnamese people who were enslaved and subjugated by the French. As socialists, we must seek ways to develop human society without causing such harm and subjugation. As Lenin explained, as one is there to be done. The building of railways seems to be a simple, natural, democratic culture and civilizing enterprise. That is what it is. That is what it is in the opinion of the bourgeois professors who are paid to depict capitalist slavery in bright colors, and in the opinion of petty bourgeoisie, bad people. But as a matter of fact, the capitalist thread, which in thousands of different intercrossings bind these enterprises with private property and in the means of production in general, have converted this railway construction into an instrument of oppressing of thousands of millions of people in the colonies and semi-colonies. That is more than half the population of the globe that inhabits independent countries, as well as the wage slaves of capital in the quote-unquote civilized countries. In the Vietnamese journal Communist Review, Dr. Nguyen Tron Shan Chain discusses the ways in which Vietnam is attempting to develop productive forces in Vietnam in accordance with socialist principles. Karl Marx once said that in a capitalist market economy, which each one sees others as the ones to exploit. Today, in the socialist-orientated market economy, we put people in the first place and regard them as the driving force of the development goal. Therefore, the Communist Party and the state of Vietnam did not wait until the economy is higher developed for realizing social goals. At the very beginning, the Communist Party and the state of Vietnam advocated, quote, economic growth together with social progress and justice in every step and throughout the process of development. The advocacy has been consistent throughout the party Congress and increasingly concretized in all aspects of the social life in order to facilitate human development in the best way. It is a correct scientific. Why am I getting so many freaking? What? Turn on your camera. The fuck? Stop giving me fucking reports. I'm here. Ugh. Jesus fucking Christ, man. There, see? Look, it's a hand. See? I'm here. Jesus. Fucking hell. Oh, where was I again? The advocacy has been consistent throughout the party Congress and increasingly concretized in all aspects of social life in order to facilitate human development in the best ways. It is a correct, scientific, bold, creative, and humane choice. An inevitable choice is based on experience, selective adherence of the strength of development of the market economy in history. In addition, it shows socialism, human nature to affirm that building a socialist-oriented market economy with people as the driving force and development goals is a correct choice. I have no idea what your fucking question was. What was the question? Capitalism is moral. Historical materialism is considered a science, not just because it analyzes history on a material basis, but also because it is intended to be applied by socialist working in the real world to bring about the transition away from capitalism and towards the stateless, classless society of communism. Communists like Marx, Engels, and Lenin did not study the material conditions of capitalism in previous eras of human history simply as an academic pursuit. They were committed communists who hoped to contribute to the end of capitalism through scientific socialism, a body of theory and knowledge which must be constantly tested through practice, focused on the practical pursuit of changing the world and bringing about socialism and eventually communism. Scientific socialism demands that we study history to learn from the successes and failures of previous generations. Communists have at various times failed to understand the nature of human development, which has led to failures, setbacks, and even collapse of entire movements. However, scientific socialism is unique within capitalist societies in that this field seeks to understand how human development processes functions, in large part through the science of historical materialism, in order to prove our political theory and practice over time, striving to consistently improve society and ultimately free workers from the suffering which is inherited in class society. As Frederick Engels wrote in Scientific Socialism, Utopian and Scientific, to accomplish this act of universal emancipation is a historical mission of the modern proletariat, to thoroughly comprehend the historical conditions and thus the very nature of this impact, in part to the now oppressed proletarian class, and full knowledge of the conditions and of the means of the momentous act it is called upon to accomplish. This is the task of the theoretical expression of the proletarian movement, scientific socialism. Section 2. How's everybody doing? We doing okay? We doing okay? Okay. All right. Section 2. The laws of suitability between the relations of production and the development of the productive forces. Number 1. Hey, Dutch. Definitions of productive forces and relations of production. Any material production process must depend on factors of workers, such as workers' abilities, skills, and knowledge, etc., as well as on factors of the means of production, such as labor, objects, tools, auxiliary means of production process. Together, these factors constitute the productive forces of the production process. The productive forces are a synthesis of the material and mental factors which together form a practical power to transform the natural world according to the needs of human survival and development. The productive forces of human society include human labor, as well as all other factors which contribute to the means of production. This includes tools and process designed by human beings, as well as nature, from which all material production process draws. In the critique of the Gotha program, Marx warns that labor alone does not constitute the entirety of the forces of production. Writing, labor is not the source of all wealth. Nature is just as much the source of use value, and it is surely of such of material wealth consists as labor, which itself is only the manifestation of a force of nature, human labor power. Human beings utilize nature and at the same time are of nature. Human beings are not metaphysically distinct from nature. We are a part of the natural world, and thus our activities are natural activities. That distinguishes human labor and human production processes from all other activities on earth is that human production is consciously active. This enables humans to intentionally develop our production activities over time through subsequential development of science, technology, and so on. Other animals may improve their life processes over time and may even use tools, but no other animal is known to have advanced through various stages of development of the modes of production through the conscious development of scientific knowledge in the same manner as human beings. This is discussed more in the next annotation. Okay, here we go. Therefore, the productive forces have the characteristics of creativity, and this creative characteristic develops through history. Creativity is a characteristic of human beings, which allows human society and production processes to develop over time through conscious activity. Marx and Engels consider the creative ability of human beings to consciously produce and develop production over time to be a primary distinguishing characteristic which distinguishes us from other animals. As Marx wrote in Estrich Labor, it is true that animals also produce. They build nests and dwellings, like the bees and the beaver, the ant, etc. But they produce only their own immediate needs or those of their young. They produce only when immediate physical need compels them to do so, while man produces even when he is free from physical need and truly produces only in freedom from such need. They produce only themselves. While man produces the whole of nature, their products belong immediately to their physical bodies, while man freely confronts his own products. Animals produce only according to the standards and needs of the species to which they belong, while man is capable of producing according to the standards of every species and of applying to each object is inherent standard. Hence, man also produces in accordance with the law of beauty. In the same article, Marx wrote that the animal is immediately one with its life activity. It is not distinct from that activity. It is that activity. Man makes his life activity itself an object of his will and consciousness. He has conscious life activity. It is not a determination with which he directly merges. Conscious life activity directly distinguishes man from animal life activity. Because human beings are aware of our own production process, we are able to creatively develop them over time through conscious activity. This creativity is rooted in dialectical relationships between human consciousness and practical activities. Therefore, the level of development of a society, productive forces reflect the level of development of a society, utilization of the natural world. What the hell? I turned on my camera. Stop doing this. I already turned on my camera, everybody. Therefore, the levels of development of society, productive forces reflects the level of development of society, utilization of the natural world. The handicraft level of productive forces reflect a lower level of utilization of the natural world compared to the productive forces that have a higher level of technology and industry. It should be noted, every time they're giving me a freaking thing, I've already shown my camera. I already showed my camera. It should be noted that the development of societies, utilization of nature from lower to higher levels is not a value judgment of goods or bad, of good or bad. Marx and Engels recognize that wanton destruction of the natural environment to increase production is an example of human hubris. As Engels explained in, quote, the part played by labor in transition from ape to man, as Marx points out in Capital. All progress in capitalistic agriculture is a progress in the art, not only of robbing the laborer, but of robbing the soil. All progress in All process in increasing the fertility of the soil for a given time is a process towards ruining the lasting sources of the fertility. The more a country starts its development on the foundation of modern industry, like the United States, for example, the more rapid is this process of destruction. Capitalist production therefore develops technology and the combining together the various processes into social whole only by sapping the original source of all wealth, the soil and the laborer. Unfortunately, the capitalist mode of production is dictated entirely by a single factory, the profit motive of capitalism. This has led to wide-scale destruction of our natural environment in the name of capitalist profiteering. Given what we know now about climate change, the rapid extinction of thousands of species result from human production activities and various other threats to our planetary environment. This only makes the necessity to move away from capitalism all the more urgent. As scientific socialists, we must understand the ways in which proper utilization of nature can cause destruction and devastation, and may even lead to our own downfall. An aspect of the historical mission of the working class, therefore, is developing harmonious and unity between humanity and nature. Class society has led to destructive exploitation of both the working class and of nature itself. In bringing about a stateless, classless society of communism, we must take into consideration the roles which nature plays in the sustaining and developing of human life. As Marx and Engels advised, we must strive to develop relations and forces of production which preserve nature and, by extension, preserves our own continued existence as part of nature and as a species with a natural aspect. The natural aspect of humanity is discussed more in chapter 6. Among the factors that make up the productive forces, namely working factors and means of production factors, the worker factors plays a decisive role. This is because ultimately the means of production are only products of human labor, and the value and actual effectiveness of the means of production depend on the efficiency and creativity of the workers. On the other hand, means of production factors, such as technological levels of tools, reflects most clearly the level of development of the productive forces, as well as the level of human utilization of the natural world. Productive forces of human society consist broadly of two categories and factors. Working factor relate to the workers who carry out production processes in human society. The means of production factors relates to the means by which workers carry out production. This includes nature in all of its resources, as well as tools, machinery, and processes which humans have devised to produce our material needs. We have a picture. See, look, TikTok, I'm doing a picture. Determines, impacts, worker factors, material production factors. These all impact. The workers determine the material impacts. The workers determine the material impacts. I think that's what they're trying to get at. Unstable connection. Jesus Christ. They don't like me in this fucking app. The productive forces are defined by the relationship between workers and the means of production. In the capitalist mode of production, it is the working class which develops the means of production over time. Without workers, the means of production would be useless and idle. The production process would neither carry out nor developed to higher levels of efficiency and productive output. Thus, under capitalism, the productive forces are defined by the dialectical relationship which the workers have with the means of production. In this dialectical relationship, workers have a determining role, while the means of production impact back on the workers by making the labor of individual workers more efficient and productive, changing the circumstances of workers in many ways. The productive forces are a fundamental, essential material content of the production process. We have more pictures, everybody. I like pictures. Here we go. So here, productive forces. All right, and then here you got determines and impact, right? And then here you have another determines and impact. Okay, so let's start with the workers. The workers, physical strength, intellectual strength. Those two impact each other for the workers, right? Workers determine the machinery, tool, the means of production. Machinery, tools, etc. Nature and machinery and tools. Nature creates the machineries and tools that we need, and that impacts nature. So you have the impact. This impacts the workers. See? Dialectical relationship. And in here, you have determined impacts of relations of production. So all this, depending on the relations of production, impacts that. All that. So let's see what they have to say. Hopefully the fucking camera thing won't do it again. The productive forces are defined by integral relationships and in turn define the material production process through its external relationship with the relations of production. The dialectical category, distance, motion, and development of a thing, phenomenon, or idea. Phenomenon refers to the external manifestation of those internal aspects and relations in specific conditions. Dialectical category pair of content and form is discussed in part 1, which we have earlier. Content is a philosophical category which refers to the sum of all aspects, contributes, and processes that a thing, phenomenon, idea is made from. Form refers to the mode of existence and development of things, phenomena, ideas. In other words, form constitutes the relatively stable relationship which exists internally within a given thing, phenomenon, or idea. More pictures. Here we go. We got more pictures, everybody. The material production force process. You have determine, we have impact. The productive forces, essential content, this is the content, determines the relations of production, social form, which impacts the productive forces. Pictures, pictures. I love my pictures. The material production process is defined by a dialectical relationship between the productive forces within the essential content and the means of production, which are determined by the productive forces. Content and form have a dialectical relationship with one another in which content determines form, and form can impact on the content. Thus, we can better understand that the productive forces are the fundamental and essential material content of the production process. This statement contains the following truths. 1. Material production process has a content of productive forces. The productive forces manifest in human society in form of relations of production. So the form would be like capitalism, I think. In a dialectical relation between the productive forces and the relations of production, the productive forces are the material content and are thus the determining factor. Number 3, as a determining factor, the productive forces constitute the essential content of the material production process. Number 4, the relations of production described how the productive forces manifest in human society and are thus the social form of production process. No particular production process can take place without the presence of both factors of productive forces, labor, i.e. workers in factories, and the means of production. However, It must be understood that it is impossible for the production process to take place with productive forces alone. In addition, the productive forces, it is also necessary to have relations of production for production processes to take place. Relationships of productions are the relationships which exist between people and in the productive process. Productive process. Productive process. Means of production. Relate of the organized means of production. Relate of the relations workers operating. The benefit goes to the ruling class. Oh, it keeps reading? Here we go. Do you see it now? So you have the ruling class, you have the working class, right? You have the means of production, and then you have the relations of production. You have the ruling class. What the fuck? What the fuck? Oh, wait. All right, so you have the ruling class, if you can see that. The ruling class exploits the worker. We get that? Now my phone's saying it's overheating. What the fuck? Fucking wild. It's not even a to the productive forces. Specifically, these include social relations which humans have with each other and with the means of production. Yeah. Dialectical relationships between productive forces and relations of production. I know, right? The relationship between productive forces and relationships of production is a dialectical unity in which productive forces determine relations of production, and relations of production impact the productive forces. Productive forces and are the social form of that process. No production process can take place without certain social form, which we call relations of production. Conversely, no production process can take place without any material content, which we call the productive forces. Thus, productive forces and relations of production mutually develop one another together, become unified. Whereas the productive forces include the material content and the material production process. The relations of production are the social forms of the material production process. This includes all relationships which humans have with each other to determine how material production process are carried out in human society. The productive forces and relations of production are not metaphysically distinct from each other. Rather, they exist together in a dialectical unity, meaning that they are each defined by their relationship with one another, and this relationship is what defines the material production process. Class society, there are the relationships which determine who owns and who operates the means of production. So the workers in capitalism operates, the ruling class owns. Productive forces include human workers who labor together through social relations of production. In a class society, that's why during the division of labor, they try to divide us out as much as possible. In the class society, the productive forces include the means of production which must be owned by some human beings and operated by others through social relations of production. This is an essential and universal requirement that exists in all practical production processes within society. A specific level of development of the productive forces requires a suitable level of development of the relations of production in all three aspects. 1. Ownership of the means of production. 2. Of the results of the production process. Only in this way can productive forces be maintained, used and further developed. Suitability describes how operated, how appropriate, or applicable a subject is for a specific application or roles. In order for human production process to be carried out efficiently, the productive forces and relations of production must be suitable with one another. This is the law of suitability between the relations of production and the productive forces, or the law of suitability, which is a fundamental law of historical materialism. This law is further defined and explained in annotation 33, which we're on right now. Is suitability between productive forces and relations of production can be broadly considered as it pertains to class. Under feudalism, the means of production were owned by different were owned by different means of production. Through the development of private capital, conditions became increasingly suitable for the industrial production process to dominate human society through the development of capitalism. Organization. Feudal societies have organized very differently from capitalist society. Political power was primarily held by monarchs and feudal landlords, with significant amounts of power also being shared by clergy and, to a lesser extent, merchants of craft guilds. This was a much more complicated method of organizing human society, which did not suit capitalist production process. As capitalists became to own the primary means of production in human society, they also shifted the organization of human society. So, as capitalists came the dominant in the organization of production more and more. Farms and factory reorganized so that capitalists dominated the overarching power structures and developed managers and enforcers, such as guards, police, detective agencies, etc., to maintain and manage productive processes and control workers. As these organizational elements developed and improved, conditions became increasingly suitable for the capitalist mode of production to gain primacy over human civilization. So it set the needs for the capitalists. Distribution. Under feudalism, land was owned by peasants, and food was distributed through the relatively complex system in which peasants had access to a portion of farm yields and also had access to some common land. Feudal lords took the majority of that which peasants produced, while religious institutions also took significant portions for the benefit of their own class. This is unsuitable to capitalist production process. As capitalists came to own the means of production, they changed and simplified the ways in which material needs are distributed. The wage system was developed, in which capitalists took surplus labor value from the workers in the form of profits and wages, were distributed to workers so that they could pay for the basic material needs of survival. The development of the wage system of capitalism made conditions increasingly suitable for capitalism to become the dominant mode of production in human society. Note that the ownership of the means of production is defined by the dominant aspect, which determines aspects of organization and distribution. I'm lagging? Am I lagging? Am I lagging? Am I lagging? Am I lagging? Without taking ownership, have been able to develop, organize. What the fuck is going on? How about now? How about now? Restrictions. Is it paused still? Is it still paused? Is it still paused? Jesus Christ. Fuck's sake. Fuck's sake. Jesus Christ. Ah, you did it for me. Damn it. I didn't notice that you did it. Comments. No. Jesus Christ. Settings. Comment setting. Okay, is it still doing it? Still doing it. Still doing it. Okay, cool. Jesus Christ. Fuck you, TikTok. Fucking bastards. Note that ownership means that ownership of the means of production is defined by the dominant aspect which determines aspects of organization and distribution. Without taking ownership of the means of production, capitalists would not have been able to develop organization and distribution aspects of human production process. This makes ownership the essential relationship in determining the relations of production. Therefore, a revolutionary class must seize the means of production and enact social revolution. The unified relation between productive forces and relations of production is inevitable and objective. Relations of productions are determined by the actual development level of the productive forces in a certain historical period, because relations of production are only the social economic form of production process, while the productive forces are the material and the technical content of that process. Just as content determines form, it is also true that matter determines consciousness. That this is a dialectical materialist concept of the relationship between matter and consciousness. The productive forces include living human beings, workers, their material labor processes, and material elements of nature, as well as material elements such as factories, tools, etc. The productive forces therefore constitute the material base of humanity's material production processes. Relations of production exist only as social economic elements, and therefore must be determined by the material base, i.e. the productive forces. That said, it is possible for the relations of production to impact back to the productive forces, as described in annotation 39. Okay, let's try this again, everybody. I'm going to show a picture. Okay. So you have material production process. You have inevitability, objectivity. You have impact, and determine. So here you have productive forces. Determine relations of production, which impacts the productive forces. Okay? All right. So down here we have productive forces. Productive forces require relationships of production to exist, just as relations of production requires productive forces. Inevitability. Objective. This relation is external from the perspective of humans. It cannot be determined by human will. All right, let's try this again. I gotta figure out a stopping point here soon. Okay, we're gonna do this one. Here we go. The relationship between productive forces and the relationship of production is considered to be inevitable and objective. The unified relations between productive forces and relations of production is said to be inevitable simply because one cannot exist without the other, and both rely upon each other. Productive forces must exist as concrete relationships between human society and human societies must have productive forces to continue to exist. The relationship between productive forces and relations of production is objective because it cannot be controlled through the subjective will of any human beings. In other words, no entity can willfully determine the material production process. Material production processes arise from objective needs of humanity and are governed by objective laws of dialectical materialism and historical materialism. However, relations of production as the social economic form of production process are always capable of impacting the motions of development of the productive forces. This impact can take place in a positive or negative direction, depending on how suitable and or unsuitable the relations of productions are with the development levels of the productive forces. If these factors are suitable with one another, then it will have a positive effect on development and vice versa. If they are not suitable, it will have a negative effect. While productive forces determine relations of production, it is also possible for relations of production to impact back on the productive forces. Whether these impacts are positive or negative is subjective. From the perspective of the capitalist class, any impact which strengthens capitalists would be considered positive. Those same impacts would be considered negative from the perspective of the working class. Another way to look at development of human beings' production process is in terms of efficiency and output. Let me see here. 87. Everybody remember 87. 87. Oof. Okay. Nothing in sight yet. 87. Is this 87? Okay. Impact might be seen as positive if they increase overall output, though this output may be seen as negative from the perspective of, for instance, the development of internal combustion engines was certainly positive in terms of total production output potential, but it has a very negative impact in terms of effects on the natural environment of our planet. When it comes to historical development of human society, positive development generally refers to increase in efficiency, output, and an increase in the capacity for human beings to produce material needs. As productive forces develop, they will eventually become so highly developed that they are no longer suitable with the existing relations of production. For example, during the transition between feudalism and capitalism, productive forces advance rapidly via industrialization and other technological developments. These developments in the productive forces were much more suitable to the emerging capitalist relations of production than they were in feudal relations of production. Feudal lords and peasants simply were not able to keep up with the productive output of capitalists and the emergent proletariat. Peasants turned to wage work in mass, and as conditions became increasingly suitable for feudalism, feudal relations of production were slowly but surely negated by capitalist relations of production. Thus, the development of productive forces to such a high level that they were no longer compatible with feudal relations of production had given rise to capitalists as a new ruling class of human society. Relationships between productive forces and the relations of productive forces is the ability to generate contradictions. Their relations of production, being the social form of production process, are relatively stable. This stability allows productive forces to develop over time, which by extension develops the production process. The more suitable and productive forces and the relations of production are with one another, the higher the chance for the productive forces to develop. However, the development of productive forces will eventually become the root cause for the end of relative stability of the relations of production. Once the relations of production become unstable and no longer suitable with the productive forces, the development of productive forces and, by extension, the productive force processes will be disrupted. The higher instability of suitability of the relations of production of the productive forces, and more likely the productive forces are to develop, but it is precisely this development of the productive forces which lead to the possibility of distributing the unity of relations of production. That has to be far served as a social economic form for its development. Once this occurs, social relations transitions away from being the suitable and necessary basis for the development of the productive forces and become the impediment to the development. In other words, a contradiction forms between the productive forces and the relations of production. From this contradiction, the objective need to reestablish and unify relationships between the productive forces and the relations of production arises. Content and form. They have a picture of like pieces of wood and nails. That's the content. The form is the end result of a chair, utilizing those nails and screws. All right. So, form refers, I might stop here. Content and form. What were you doing beforehand? I might stop here. Let's see here. Yeah, we're going to stop at content and form, I think. Yes, there is a picture for you, but I'll show it tomorrow. Okay, so what we got here is that the productive forces and the mode of production impact each other. One has to exist in order for society to be built. Now, rather that relations to production is capitalistic depends on the impact of the productive forces. So it depends on the social relations of production. It depends on the mode of production, on what impacts the productive forces. But the productive forces always impact the mode of production. Rather, they own the mode of production is a different thing. So we have to observe the mode of production, but we have to observe who owns the mode of production and who it impacts and how it impacts. And we can see that in capitalism, it's an exploitation, wage slavery, and free labor in some different places. On page 88. Oh my God. Ew. So we have to be ever observing of this, and this is good stuff. This is what I got. Like, it kept repeating the things over and over again on that too. Does anybody have any questions that can want to put in the comments? I'm assuming no. Okay, so now since there's no questions, I'm assuming that all of you got it all in one go. Please do a world a favor. Oh my God, what are you going to say? What kind of bigotry are you going to say? I'm waiting. I wanted to know what they were going to say, dang it. I wanted to know what they were going to say, Lind. I just want to know what they're going to say. I know, he's gone. All right, everybody. Well, tomorrow we'll top on form and content. We'll still go into the historical materialism. We'll hit up some the cycles of development of the mode of production. We'll hit up more pictures, way more pictures to go. Lots more pictures to go, everybody. Oh, I better put a bookmark. Don't you think? Should I put a bookmark in? Bookmark. Add a bookmark. And this, like I said, this is a good base level to start your foundation of a Marxism and understanding dialectical materialism. It's a good starting point, I'd say. 89. 88, actually. All right, everybody. Well, I'm going to go ahead and close down because TikTok hates me right now. Seems like it. So, yeah. I understand. Understandable. But anyways, thank you, everybody. I appreciate it. Thank you for staying along.